Hey Doodles, Virtual Mrs. Hagen here, and in this video I'm going to teach you some collaging techniques. If you are practicing these techniques along with me, you are going to need some paper, a pair of scissors, and a bottle of glue, as well as a surface to glue your techniques onto. And the first technique we are going to talk about is geometric shapes. And a geometric shape is any shape that has a name. So a triangle, or cutting out a square, or a rectangle, or even cutting out a circle or an oval. Anything that has a name is a geometric shape. And geometric shapes can be combined together to make more complex shapes. Our next technique is organic shapes, or shapes that you cut out that don't have names, such as that big fluffy cloud shape that we like to use. Or just a random blobby shape. These are those curvy, rounded shapes that don't have names. They can also be these weird, like zigzaggy shapes. Now, some people would also call these geometric shapes because they have some, very, very pointed corners to them. I say that they probably live somewhere in between the two, but when I categorize them in my classroom, I call them an organic shape because they don't have a name. Our next technique is called overlapping, and that is when you glue things together. And I'm actually going to turn this into a house. Or dot, dot, not a lot. Flip it, stick it, and pat it. So when you take shapes and you glue them so that one shape blocks another shape, and this creates a sense of overlap or space in your picture as well. So if I were to glue this down, the overlap would show that the house is in front of the cloud, but behind, I don't know, let's call this little blob of bush. And sometimes if you make a decision that you want to put something behind and overlap in front of another object, you can lift it and slide your other one in place, as well as being able to glue from the back forwards. Our next example is called layering, and essentially layering is when you take multiple shapes, either geometric or organic, and you layer them together to make a more complex shape. One of my favorite shapes to use with layering is a window, mostly because it allows me to show you the different layers that you can stack together and the different ways that layering can be used. So if for some reason I wanted to have a purple window with a red frame, what I would do is I would take my window and I would glue the window down to the paper that I wanted to make the frame color, and then I would cut these things out. And what that does, a little bit too much there, even that out a bit, is it creates two different layers on the picture. And obviously windows are not the only things you can use this for. Anything where you need big shapes and small shapes together, you can use this because you can take small shapes and glue it to big shapes and cut them down like I did for this, or you can take a shape that's too big and glue it on top. So now my window has a sash, and I can flip it over and cut off the parts that are too much. So I just keep layering paper together until I have the shape of the object that I want, hence the term layers. The next group of examples I'm going to show you guys. The next group of techniques I'm going to show you are ones that deal with what's called negative space. Usually we think about the positive space on our picture, which is the space that is taken up by objects. The negative space is the space that is behind those objects. And these techniques that I'm about to show you use the negative space to create the image. So the first one I'm going to show you is called counter change, which is when you have a shape that you want to show, but you're going to have half of it be positive space, and then the other half is negative space. So I still have a circle, but it's both positive and negative space. Another fun way to show this is to keep your big paper as a full rectangle and then cut whatever you need your shape to be out of that. And then glue down one side and the other side and see how it makes one great big shape together. You could even layer in details on this and turn it into something else. So you can add details to your counter change, which can be quite a lot of fun. I kind of have sort of a dragon's mouth going on here, it looks like. Another thing that deals with negative space is something that is called revealed lines. And a revealed line is exactly what it sounds like. You are making a line reveal itself from in between two other shapes. So I just made a straight line by putting two pieces close to each other. I could do the same thing and make a zigzag line, or a diagonal line, or a horizontal line. And basically all you're doing is cutting something into two pieces and then gluing them slightly apart so that you find the line inside. A lot of friends like to use this to make fun swirls, because if I just take my scissors and cut out a swirly shape, while this is very fun, it doesn't really make something that I can glue down flat and show a swirly line in. But if I go back around again and cut some of it out so that there will be negative space revealed, it will show a line. Very fun negative space thing to do is called an explosion. And I'm just going to do a quick layer here so that we can see what happens when you do this with an object, not just a shape. I'm just going to, like I said, very quickly layer some things together here. Ta-da! However, I do need to glue them for this to work. And now all I need to do is the exploding technique. So the explosion technique is when you take something that you've made and you cut it into a bunch of pieces. I'm just going to cut this into 4. You could do more than 4, you could do less than 4. And then when you glue it down, you leave the lines showing so that it looks like it's exploding apart. And the final technique I want to show you is called texture. And that's basically just taking paper that is nice and smooth and making it have texture to it before you use it. And there are a couple of ways to do that. The first one is actually cutting texture, which you would just cut in whatever lines you want to reveal as texture. And then when you glue it down, there's a little bit of a ripple texture to what you're putting on. Another is to fold. So I could fold this a couple of times. And then I could fold it a few more times. And I'm trying to make a square pattern on it. That's why I'm folding it so many times. And then when I open it, that folded texture is on my paper. You can also very carefully take your scissors and incise on your paper. And that basically just means that you are taking the paper and pushing a line into it with your scissors. And this can be used just to add a pattern texture on it. It can also be used as a sneaky way to draw a shape before you cut it out. And then you don't have a pencil line. And the last way that I want to talk to you guys about adding texture is by crumpling your paper. And then when you open it up, you have a crinkly texture to your paper. I also forgot there is a ripping technique you can do to add texture, which is where instead of cutting your lines, you would rip them, which adds texture to your cuts themselves. So it's still a very deliberate thing, but it has a little bit more texture to it when you're done. Things that these techniques can be used for are really endless. I mean, anything that you want to depict into a collage with, you will be using. The ways that these techniques can be used are pretty endless. Your basic techniques that you are going to use in every single collage you make are going to be your organic and geometric shapes, overlap, and layers. Okay. Texture can be used also in a lot of different types of collaging. It just depends on what you are trying to depict and whether you want it to have a flat, smooth cutout texture, or if you want to give it a little bit more life into the paper. That really depends on your own personal technique and style when it comes to art. And a lot of the negative space things can be used in abstract work or to draw emphasis to something. Because our negative space techniques, they look very different from our positive space ones. And that makes the person who's looking at your artwork's eye draw into the space that is different. But that's not the only way to add emphasis. It's just a different kind of idea that you could use.